The moment the will was read, the room turned ice cold. I barely had time to process the grief of losing my grandfather when my mother stood up, placed a firm hand on her husband's arm, and declared in a steady, self-assured voice, "From now on, Richard will be in charge of the company." I blinked. Richard, my stepfather, the man my mother married less than a year ago. The man who had spent the past 6 months making offhand comments about how someone my age couldn't handle real responsibility. I looked around the room. No one else seemed surprised. My aunts, my uncles, even some of the board members present. Silent, as if this had already been decided. But there was one small problem with my mother's confident announcement. I owned the company now. A week before the funeral, I sat beside my grandfather's hospital bed, holding his fragile hand. "Mia, you're the only one I trust," he rasped, his voice barely above a whisper. Tears stung my eyes. My entire life, Grandpa was the only one who ever truly believed in me. My mother, on the other hand, had made it clear that I was a disappointment. "Don't let them take what I built," he said, his grip tightening slightly. "They will try. And when they do, don't be afraid. I've prepared everything." I didn't understand what he meant. At least not yet. Now, as the lawyer cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses, my mother looked expectantly at him, waiting for confirmation that her husband would be taking over Grandpa's empire. Instead, the lawyer glanced at me. According to Mr. Whitmore's will, his entire estate, including all shares in Whitmore Industries, has been left to his granddaughter, Mia Whitmore. The silence was deafening. I felt every eye in the room snap toward me. "That must be a mistake," my mother said, her voice clipped. "He meant to leave it to me." The lawyer remained calm. "I assure you there is no mistake. Mia is the sole heir. Effective immediately, she owns the company." Richard was the first to react, laughing under his breath like this was some kind of joke. "Sweetheart, you can't be serious," he said, looking at me like I was a child playing dress-up. "A business of this size requires real experience. It's not a school project." I stayed silent, watching them. Then, as if the lawyer's words finally hit her, my mother's face twisted in fury. "If that's how it is," she spat, "then leave our house immediately." I stared at her. "Our house?" I couldn't help it. I actually laughed. "You mean Grandpa's house?" I said, shaking my head. "You might want to read that will a little more carefully, Mom, because something tells me there's another surprise waiting for you." The stunned silence in the room stretched unbearably. My mother's face had gone white with fury, her lips pressed into a thin line as if she were physically holding back a scream. Richard, standing beside her, kept glancing between me and the lawyer, his confidence cracking for the first time. I had expected resistance. I just hadn't expected it this soon. "You're joking," my mother finally hissed, voice low but laced with venom. "Grandpa would never do this. He would never leave you in charge over me." The lawyer calmly adjusted his papers, completely unfazed. "Mr. Whitmore made his intentions very clear. Mia is the sole beneficiary of his estate, including his home, all financial assets, and 100% of Whitmore Industries shares." I barely had time to process it myself. I had known about the company, but the house, his estate, everything? My mother must have realized this at the same time I did because her expression shifted into something dark. "If that's the case," she snapped, voice cold and controlled, "then you are no longer welcome in this house. Pack your things and leave immediately." The room fell even quieter. It was almost comical. Did she really just kick me out of my own home? I exhaled slowly, trying not to laugh again. "Mom, I think you misunderstood something. This house, it's mine now. Grandpa left it to me." Her face twitched, like she was struggling to comprehend the words. "That's absurd. This is our family home." "And now I'm the only legal family member who owns it," I shot back. Richard finally stepped in, forcing a condescending smile. "Mia, sweetheart," he said, in that patronizing tone he always used. You're young. You don't understand the weight of running a company like this. It's more than just an inheritance. It's a responsibility. Your mother and I have years of experience. Let us help you. There it was. Their real plan. This wasn't about family. It was about control. They had expected the company to go to my mother. She was supposed to sign it over to Richard, and he was supposed to be in charge. But instead, the only person standing between him and Grandpa's empire was me, and he thought he could sweet-talk me into handing it over. I crossed my arms, refusing to look away. Let me get this straight. The moment you realized you weren't getting the company, Mom tried to kick me out of my own home, and now you're saying you should be the one running everything? You think I'm stupid? Richard flushed but kept his fake smile. That's not what I'm saying at all. I think I understand perfectly, I interrupted. You assumed Grandpa would leave everything to Mom. You two were probably already planning how you'd take over. But the thing is, Grandpa saw right through you. That's why he left it all to me. My mother slammed her hand down on the table, her expression shifting from anger to desperation. Mia, you don't know what you're doing, she snapped. This is a billion-dollar industry. It takes more than a lucky inheritance to run something this big. The lawyer cleared his throat. Actually, Mr. Whitmore had already put measures in place to ensure a smooth transition for Mia. My mother whipped her head toward him. What measures? The lawyer adjusted his glasses. Mr. Whitmore knew that Mia might need guidance, so he appointed a trusted team of advisors to oversee operations while she transitions into her new role as CEO. The board has already been notified, and all legal documents have been finalized. I felt a wave of relief rush over me. Grandpa had prepared for this. He knew they would try to manipulate me, so he made sure I wouldn't be alone. Richard's expression darkened. His polite act was slipping. He turned to my mother, lowering his voice, but I still heard him. We can fight this. But the lawyer shook his head. You cannot. The will is airtight. There is nothing to contest. I watched my mother's last ounce of control shatter. She had spent years belittling me, treating me like I was an afterthought, a disappointment. She had never imagined a world where she wasn't in charge. And now she had nothing. She looked at me like I had personally betrayed her, like I had stolen something from her. You're making a mistake, she said finally. You think this is a victory? Running a company isn't a game, Mia. You'll fail. I stared at her, letting her words settle in. Then, with a slow, deliberate smile, I leaned forward. I guess we'll see, won't we? The tension in the room was suffocating. My mother's glare bore into me, her perfectly manicured fingers curling into fists on the polished oak table. Richard sat stiffly beside her, his jaw clenched as if he were holding back a tirade. I could almost hear their thoughts. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. I had been the inconvenience in their perfect plan, the naive girl they could push aside, the easy target they could manipulate. But Grandpa had seen through them, and that's why he had chosen me. This doesn't make sense, my mother finally said, voice shaking with anger. Dad would never do this to me. I was his only daughter. Why would he cut me out of everything? I turned to the lawyer, wondering the same thing. Grandpa and I had always been close, but even I hadn't expected him to leave her with nothing. The lawyer gave a measured sigh and folded his hands on the table. Mr. Whitmore left a letter explaining his decision. He instructed that I read it in the event of any confusion. He pulled a sealed envelope from his briefcase and carefully opened it. I watched my mother shift uneasily in her seat. Mia, the lawyer read aloud. If you're hearing this, it means I'm gone. And by now, I'm sure your mother is outraged. She'll call it unfair. She'll claim she was supposed to inherit everything. But the truth is, she lost that right a long time ago. I glanced at my mother. Her lips had pressed together in a hard line, her face unreadable. Your mother always thought money meant power, but she never understood that power requires responsibility. When she was younger, I gave her chance after chance to prove herself worthy of running the family business. Instead, she spent decades trying to take shortcuts. choosing luxury over leadership, selfishness over sacrifice. The lawyer continued reading. She always believed that being my daughter entitled her to my fortune, but entitlement isn't the same as earning something. And as for Richard, if he's in the room right now, I imagine he's trying to hide his true colors. But I know what he is. A leech. A man who saw an opportunity in my daughter's bank account and took it. I won't let my life's work fall into his hands. Richard's face turned beet red. I could see his rage simmering, but he stayed silent. Mia, you are different, the letter continued. You never expected anything from me, and that's exactly why I chose you. You worked hard. You learned. You respected the business for what it is. A legacy, not just a cash machine. I watched you grow, and I knew. You are the only one I can trust to continue what I built. My heart pounded. Grandpa had seen me. All those summers I had spent shadowing him in the office, taking notes, asking questions, while my mother dismissed my curiosity as a childish phase. He had been watching. I know this won't be easy. The letter continued. Your mother will try to fight you. Richard will try to control you. But remember this. I didn't leave you alone. I left you with the tools to win. The lawyer finished reading and folded the letter neatly, placing it back in the envelope. Silence stretched between us. My mother was trembling with humiliation and rage. This is ridiculous, she spat. He was old. He was sick. He wasn't thinking clearly when he wrote that will. Actually, the lawyer said, unshaken, Mr. Whitmore updated his will only 3 months ago. He was of completely sound mind, and legally there is nothing you can do to contest it. Richard stood abruptly, shoving his chair back. We're wasting time here. Let's go. But my mother didn't move. She was still staring at me. You really think you're going to handle all of this? She asked coldly. You think you're ready for it? I held her gaze. Yes. That night I barely slept. I wasn't scared exactly, but the weight of it all, owning an empire overnight, becoming CEO before I even had a chance to celebrate my 25th birthday, was overwhelming. Grandpa believed in me. That was the only thing keeping me steady. The next morning, I went to the company headquarters for the first official board meeting since the will was read. My grandfather's trusted advisors were waiting for me, just like he promised. I wasn't alone. But as I stepped out of my car, a familiar voice called out. Mia! I turned. My mother and Richard were standing by the entrance, their expressions carefully neutral. We need to talk, my mother said smoothly. Just the 3 of us. No lawyers, no board members, just family. I already knew this wasn't about family. This was their last attempt to get what they wanted, and I wasn't going to let them win. I studied my mother and Richard as they stood at the entrance of my company's headquarters. They had lost the legal battle. The will was ironclad. They couldn't take the company from me by force. So now they were trying to negotiate. I knew this wasn't a casual conversation. This was their last shot at control. We need to talk, my mother repeated, her tone eerily calm. I took a slow breath. I wasn't afraid of them anymore. Talk then, I said flatly. Richard glanced around, lowering his voice. Not here, somewhere private. I should have walked away. I should have ignored them completely. But something in me wanted to hear them out, if only to see what desperate move they'd make next. So I nodded. Fine. 5 minutes. We ended up in a small conference room inside the building. Richard sat down like he belonged there, while my mother stood stiffly, arms crossed, watching me like a hawk. You're in over your head, Mia, she started, voice softer now, almost gentle. Grandpa put an impossible burden on you. It's not fair to expect you to run a billion-dollar empire at your age. I smirked. And you think Richard should run it instead? Yes, she said without hesitation. At least for now. He has experience in leadership. You could learn from him. I let out a small laugh, shaking my head. You mean I should sign everything over to him and step aside like a good little girl? Richard leaned forward, his smile rehearsed. Not exactly. We're proposing a partnership. I raised an eyebrow. You'll still be the face of the company, he continued. You'll still have your title, but I'll handle the actual operations. You won't have to deal with the pressure. No board meetings, no tough decisions. You can just enjoy your life. I stared at him. You want me to be a figurehead? It's the best arrangement, my mother chimed in. The board will feel more comfortable, and you won't have to deal with the stress of making mistakes. You're still so young, Mia. You could ruin everything Grandpa built just by making one wrong decision. There it was. The manipulation, the fear tactics, the subtle insults dressed up as concern. I leaned back in my chair. And what do I get out of this? Richard smiled as if he'd just won. A huge payout. We'll transfer a percentage of the company's revenue into your personal account every month. You'll never have to worry about money. You can live however you want, travel, do whatever makes you happy, and the company stays successful. It was almost impressive how confident he was in this plan. They truly thought I'd just roll over and let them take control. I pretended to consider it. And what happens if I say no? My mother's expression darkened. Mia, don't be reckless. Meaning? Meaning you'll have enemies, she said carefully. The board doesn't trust you. The shareholders will question your every move. If you refuse to work with us, we won't protect you from that pressure. I tilted my head. You mean you'll sabotage me? Richard smirked. He didn't deny it. I let out a slow breath, then stood up. Thanks for the offer, I said, but I'll take my chances. My mother shot up from her chair. Mia, don't do this. I turned toward the door, but she grabbed my wrist. Do you really think you can win? She hissed. You don't understand how this world works. You think Grandpa did you a favor by handing this company to you? Number, he put a target on your back. The board will eat you alive. The investors will bury you. You need us. I stared at her. No, Mom, I said quietly. I needed you when I was a kid. I needed you to believe in me, but you never did. You wanted me to fail, just so you could take what wasn't yours. But I'm not a scared little girl anymore. She flinched, just slightly. Richard stood up, his patience clearly running out. You're making a huge mistake, Mia. Don't come crying to us when it all blows up in your face. I smiled. I won't. Then I walked out of the room, leaving them behind for good. I knew they wouldn't give up easily. The moment I walked away from my mother and Richard, I could feel it in my bones. They were planning something. And I was right. The first attack came 2 days later. I walked into my first official board meeting as CEO, expecting resistance. But I wasn't prepared for the full-scale assault waiting for me. The moment I took my seat at the head of the long mahogany table, the air in the room shifted. The board members, mostly men in their 50s and 60s who had worked under my grandfather for decades, stared at me with thinly veiled skepticism. I barely had a chance to greet them before one of them, Mr. Holloway, leaned forward, his expression tight. Mia, before we begin, I think we need to address the elephant in the room. I set my hands on the table. And what elephant would that be? He exchanged glances with a few others as if seeking approval before he spoke. Your grandfather was a brilliant man, but let's be honest. He made an impulsive decision by putting you in charge. You don't have the qualifications. You don't have the experience. And quite frankly, we're concerned. I kept my expression neutral. I had expected this, but hearing it said so openly still made my chest tighten. Concerned about what? I asked. About your ability to lead. I noticed another board member, Mr. Langston, checking his phone casually. Then he let out a small sigh and muttered just loud enough for everyone to hear. The media already caught wind of the transition. The headlines aren't flattering. My stomach dropped. I reached for my phone under the table and discreetly pulled up the news. The headlines hit me like a punch to the gut. Whitmore Empire falls into inexperienced hands. Can the heiress handle it? Corporate gamble? 25-year-old Mia Whitmore takes over billion-dollar company. Insiders predict collapse of Whitmore Industries under new CEO. I felt my pulse spike, but I forced myself to stay calm. This wasn't an accident. This was sabotage. And I had a very strong suspicion who was behind it. By the time the meeting ended, the company's PR team had called me 3 times. I walked into my office, locked the door, and finally listened to their frantic messages. Mia, the media firestorm is growing. We need a response. Investors are nervous. Stocks dipped 3% this morning. We suspect someone inside the company leaked damaging statements about your inexperience. The board is already discussing an alternative leadership plan. I clenched my jaw. Alternative leadership plan. That could only mean one thing. A coup. I checked my email. Sure enough, there was already a formal request for a leadership vote to reassess the company's direction under its new leadership. Richard and my mother were behind this. They had fed the media the story that I was too young, too incapable. They had whispered in the ears of nervous investors. And now they were trying to push me out before I even had a chance to prove myself. I should have panicked. I should have felt defeated. But instead, I smiled, because I had been preparing for this. I picked up my phone and dialed the one person who could help me turn this around. It rang twice before I heard a familiar, smooth voice. I was wondering when you'd call. I exhaled in relief. I need your help. Lucas Sinclair, my grandfather's most trusted business partner, a financial genius, a man who had once turned a failing company into a billion-dollar empire overnight. And more importantly, someone who hated my mother and Richard just as much as I did. I assume this is about the media circus? He asked, amusement lacing his tone. You assume correctly. And the board is already sharpening their knives? They're holding a vote in 2 days. Ah, he hummed. Classic corporate betrayal. Well then, Mia, it's time we remind them why your grandfather chose you. I met Lucas that night in his private office, a sleek, glass-walled space overlooking the city skyline. He studied me carefully, then smirked. You're not scared? No. Good. Then let's crush them. Over the next few hours, we built a strategy. 1. The board meeting trap. Lucas would gather key investors who still trusted my grandfather's vision. They would publicly endorse me before the vote. 2. The media takeover. I would sit down for an exclusive interview to counter the negative press. We would highlight my qualifications and reveal my grandfather's own words about why he chose me. 3. Exposing the sabotage. Lucas had connections who could trace exactly who leaked the damaging stories. If Richard or my mother were behind it, we would expose them. Publicly. By the time we finished, it was nearly midnight. I stood, shaking Lucas's hand. Thank you for this. Don't thank me yet. He said, grinning. Wait until we see their faces when they realize you're not so easy to get rid of. The next morning, the headlines were different. CEO Mia Whitmore breaks silence. Exclusive interview set to air tonight. Whitmore Industries stock stabilizes as investors show support. Who's really behind the smear campaign? Sources say corporate backstabbing at play. I sat at my desk, watching the tide begin to turn in my favor. But I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over yet. Richard and my mother weren't just going to sit back and watch their plan fail. They were going to fight dirty. And I needed to be ready for their next move. The morning of the board vote arrived. I stood outside the massive glass doors of Whitmore Industries, looking up at the towering building that belonged to me. Today would decide everything. Either I would prove that Grandpa had made the right choice, or I would be forced out before I even had the chance to lead. And I knew one thing for sure. Richard and my mother wouldn't play fair. The boardroom was packed. Every seat around the long table was filled with powerful men and women, most of whom had been loyal to my grandfather for decades. At the head of the table sat Mr. Holloway, the same board member who had questioned my leadership just days before. We'll begin with a vote, he announced. As many of you know, concerns have been raised about Mia Whitmore's ability to lead this company. Several members have proposed an alternative leadership plan, which we will now discuss. The doors opened and Richard and my mother walked in. I wasn't surprised. They had been planning this moment all along. Richard cleared his throat, acting as if he were already in charge. Ladies and gentlemen, let's be honest. Running this company requires years of experience, and as much as we all respect Mia, he gave me a fake smile. We must prioritize what's best for the company. I watched him pace like he was giving a well-rehearsed speech. I have the experience. I know the company. I have a strong vision for the future. That's why I'm proposing that I take over as CEO, while Mia remains involved as a figurehead, the public face of Whitmore Industries. He sat down, smug, as if the deal was already done. I let the silence hang for a moment before I spoke. "It's funny, Richard," I said, keeping my voice calm, "because I remember you saying something very different in your private conversations." His face twitched. "Excuse me?" I turned to Lucas, who was sitting beside me. He placed a folder on the table and slid it toward the board members. In the past week, Richard and my mother have been working behind the scenes to sabotage my leadership. But they didn't just leak false stories to the press. They also attempted to undermine the company itself. The board members opened the folder. Inside were emails, text messages, and call transcripts, all proving that Richard had been actively contacting competitors, trying to negotiate deals that would weaken Whitmore Industries' market position. Mr. Holloway's face darkened as he read. "What is this?" he demanded. "Proof," Lucas said smoothly. "Proof that Richard has been actively working against the company's interests. He didn't want to save the company. He wanted to use it for his own gain." Richard's face turned red. "This is outrageous. You can't prove—" "Oh, but we can," I interrupted, "because we also traced the media leaks. And guess what? The source came from a private email registered under Richard's name." The boardroom erupted in murmurs. My mother stood up sharply, glaring at me. "Mia, enough!" she snapped. "You're being ridiculous. You're just trying to make him look bad because you're scared." I smiled. "I don't have to make him look bad, Mom. He did that all on his own." She opened her mouth to argue, but Mr. Holloway slammed his hand on the table. "That's enough," he said coldly. He turned to Richard, his expression full of disgust. "You were actively plotting against this company while pretending to be its savior. That alone disqualifies you from any leadership position." I sat back, watching the panic spread across Richard's face. For the first time, he realized he had lost. "It's time to vote," Mr. Holloway said, his voice sharp. The board members exchanged glances. Then, one by one, they raised their hands in my favor. The final count? Unanimous. I was officially recognized as the rightful CEO of Whitmore Industries. I exhaled, my chest feeling lighter than it had in weeks. It was over. Security escorted Richard out of the building within the hour. My mother followed him, humiliated. "You'll regret this, Mia," she whispered before leaving. I didn't respond, because I knew the truth. The only thing I regretted was trusting her for as long as I did. Later that night, Lucas joined me in my office, a satisfied smirk on his face. "You did good, kid," he said. "Your grandfather would be proud." I smiled. "Thanks, Lucas. For everything. Don't mention it." He stood, stretching. "Now go celebrate. You earned it." 1 year after taking over the company, I stood at a podium, addressing a packed audience. When my grandfather chose me to run Whitmore Industries, many people doubted me. They said I was too young, too inexperienced. I glanced down at the business magazine in front of me, its bold headline reading, "MIA Whitmore, the CEO who proved them all wrong." But what they didn't realize, I continued, was that success isn't about age. It's about preparation, perseverance, and the ability to rise when people expect you to fall. The crowd applauded and I smiled, because I had won, and I had built my own legacy.
After my parents' funeral, who left behind a shoe company worth $150 million, I entered the CEO's office. My husband, already sitting in the CEO's chair, said, "Now I am the CEO of this company. If you do not agree with this, here are your divorce papers." I couldn't help but burst out laughing because my husband was. "So how much did your mother leave you?" Larry asked me bluntly right after my mother's funeral. I couldn't believe he said that without even a word of sympathy for me. He must have thought the inheritance was already in my account because he saw me with the bank book, but that was just wrong as a human being. "It's about $2 million, I said. $2 million. That's it, Larry replied, smirking in a way that made me feel uneasy. Well, even after taxes there should be 101,000 left. I didn't like his reaction at all. He had a nasty smile that made me uncomfortable. I didn't know what he was planning, but I was sure things wouldn't go his way. The next day Larry quickly started his plan, but his shallow thinking was going to cost him everything. He just didn't know it yet. "My name is Sarah Taylor. I got married through an arranged marriage when I was 19. My husband's name is Larry and he works for a company. He is 3 years older than me and is the oldest son of the Owen family. However, even though he's called the oldest son, his younger brother Frank left the house after graduating from university and hasn't been in touch since. So Larry was treated like an only child and was very loved by my parents-in-law. Honestly, I didn't want to marry Larry, but my mother came from a family that had been running a business for generations. I was in a position where I couldn't go against what my parents decided, so I ended up marrying Larry. He couldn't refuse the marriage either because his father was in business. We didn't marry out of love. It was a marriage far from happiness. Unfortunately, we couldn't have children. Since we got married young, it was hard to accept that we couldn't have kids, and I hoped that having a child would improve our situation. But even with hospital visits, it didn't happen. "Hey barren woman, are the chores done?" At first my parents-in-law, who used to treat me well as a young lady, started calling me a barren woman after a few years. I mean, you should be able to make it happen if you just do what you're supposed to do. It's a waste of money going to the hospital. My father-in-law would say mean things to me every day, but Larry never stood up for me. While I was being scolded by my in-laws, he would either read the newspaper or take a nap, snoring away. Even when I wanted to change and said I wanted to work, he would say, "If you go to work, people will think we're not doing well," and wouldn't let me leave the house. At that time it was common for women to become homemakers after getting married. However, living with just my mother-in-law was honestly a nightmare every day. No one would help me. I couldn't worry my parents by telling them, and I couldn't run away because our marriage was tied to work. Still, I thought I would be rewarded someday and desperately endured every day. However, no matter how many years passed, the situation never got better. 19 years after our marriage, when I turned 43, my father-in-law died in an accident. That incident led to the discovery that his company had been avoiding taxes. The back taxes and fines depleted our assets. Our property was seized and the company went bankrupt. Although we kept the house, we had to let go of our comfortable lifestyle. I thought it would be hard for Larry, who was then 45, to find a new job, but my parents introduced him to one. Thanks to that, he quickly found work. But my mother-in-law became like an empty shell and aged rapidly. For a while she didn't even have the energy to say mean things to me, which was a relief. But then she had a stroke and needed care. With this, I truly lost any hope of having a child anymore. I was already 43 and somewhat giving up in my heart, but this became the real turning point for letting go. Larry, as if it were only natural, pushed the care of his mother onto me. On his days off he would lounge around just like before. "Larry, I wish you'd help with your mother's care sometimes," I gathered my courage and told him one day. Even if it were just on his days off or even for one meal, if he could help, it would mean so much to me. But Larry frowned and said, "I'm working, you know. Let me rest on my days off." Larry just didn't seem to understand. I don't really have what you would call a day off. After Larry's father's company went bankrupt, my parents started worrying about me. They finally said, "Come back home." But what would happen to his mother if I left now? "We have a caretaker come once a week, but I can't imagine having the money to hire someone every day for this house." Even though I was treated badly, I couldn't abandon her. It just wasn't in me to do that. Eventually, Larry started leaving the house early, even on his days off. He said he felt uncomfortable if he stayed home and relaxed. I heard through the neighbors that he started saying, "My wife won't even let me relax at home on my days off." He began taking solo trips, and the neighbors knew his mother needed care. Knowing this, yet acting as if he left all the caregiving to me, showed he didn't care about how others saw him. It was sad to see his mother, who loved Larry, being ignored by him once she got sick. Sometimes she would say, "It's because you're here that Larry won't come." But when I replied, "Should I leave then?" she would quickly go quiet. This went on for another 19 years, and the long caregiving period finally ended when my mother-in-law passed away, reuniting with her husband. I was about to turn 59, I had no love left for Larry, but I had come to terms with many things. Leaving didn't seem possible, and I would probably spend the rest of my days in this house. Larry was diligent only in his work, and this was noticed. Even after reaching retirement age, he was asked to keep working as senior staff. This allows me to live the way I do now. We were never a close couple, but I am thankful for this aspect. Our marriage wasn't good, but Larry never tried to kick me out. He probably thinks it's too late for that now. He still prefers being out of the house on his days off, so I've come to enjoy my alone time. I've even taken up pottery as a hobby. I've made friends at this age and am spending days that I can finally enjoy for the first time since getting married. But this seems to have annoyed Larry. "You're out playing while I'm working," he said. And one day he even burned my bag. I used the bag for my pottery class, and Larry burned it in the yard. "What are you doing? Don't get lost in weird hobbies. Just do the housework," he said. My pottery materials and my pouch were still inside the bag. Even pouring water on it was too late. It turned to ashes. I was really furious. I thought it was too late for change, but I still had a long life ahead. The word divorce crossed my mind, but just as I was considering it, another misfortune struck. My parents suddenly passed away. My father died suddenly from an illness, and a month after his funeral, my mother also fell ill and passed away. It all happened so fast, and I was overwhelmed with sorrow. My brother Jack had already taken over my father's company, and with so many people at both my father's and then my mother's funerals, I ended up bedridden for about a week afterward. It must have been mental exhaustion. My friends from the pottery class were kind enough to check on me, but Larry mocked me saying, "How long are you going to sleep?" I was tired after Mom's funeral too, but I didn't sleep that much. It must be nice to sleep all you want without working. It might have been a valid point, but as words from a husband to a wife, it was really hurtful. The next day I forced myself to get up and return to my daily routine since I didn't have the luxury to enjoy my hobbies anymore. It was a bare minimum life, but Larry seemed satisfied and didn't care about my feelings. Then sometime after my mother's funeral, I remembered that the payment deadline to the funeral home was approaching, and looked at the bank book. Jack was busy with work, so I had promised to make the payment on his behalf. However, Larry saw me with the bank book and came over with a sleazy smile. "So how much was your mother's inheritance?" I was shocked by his words. He said this right after my mother's funeral without a single word of concern for me. He must have thought the inheritance had been deposited because he saw me looking at the bank book, but surely that's unthinkable for a human being. I answered dully, "About $2 million. $2 million? That's it?" he said, smirking with an unpleasant smile. "Well, even after taxes there should be 100 of 1,000 left." What an awful smile. I didn't know what Larry was thinking, but I was sure things wouldn't go his way. Without saying anything to him, I quietly put away the bank book. Finally noticing the mood, Larry spoke up. "Well, you've had it tough. You should rest early today." It was unusual for Larry to offer kind words, maybe because he felt awkward. Far from making me happy, it made me feel sick. I didn't want to see his face anymore, so I went to bed early that day. However, something unexpected happened the next day. After breakfast, Larry left for work as usual, but then I got a call saying he hadn't shown up at his workplace. I was shocked because this had never happened before. Worried that he might have been an accident, I hurriedly called Larry, but I couldn't get through. As I paced around restlessly, I walked into the living room and understood everything. On the living room table was a piece of paper. It was a divorce form already filled out by Larry. The moment I saw it, I thought, "No way," and checked where I had put the bank book the day before. As I expected, the bank book was gone. "Unbelievable," I muttered inside. It wasn't an accident or anything. Larry had likely disappeared on his own. I had thought he was up to something in the living room that morning. By taking those items, he must be planning to start a new life without me. Larry hadn't driven me out before because he was waiting for my parents' inheritance. The stolen bank book was proof enough. Even with this realization, I remained calm. There was no need to panic. I slowly filled out the divorce form and took it to the city office. Larry had sown the seeds of his own downfall. I decided he needed to fully understand that it was too late for regrets. I properly contacted Larry's workplace and said, "I can't reach him either, but it doesn't seem like an accident. I'll let you know as soon as I get in touch. Sorry for the inconvenience." The workplace said they would treat it as a paid leave for the day and wished him well, which made me envious of Larry for having such a good workplace. After all, it was a company introduced by my parents. I hoped he would be sincere towards his workplace, but now he was going to be a stranger to me. I managed to submit the divorce form successfully. After going through so much, it's surprising how easily I became free. I wondered if my life could have been different if I had divorced earlier. As I was packing up my things, my phone rang. It was Larry, who hadn't answered my calls before. I knew what he would say, so I ignored it and kept packing. The phone kept ringing again and again. Eventually, even the house phone started ringing. It was probably Larry, and it was so annoying that I reluctantly decided to answer it. "Hello," I said casually. Sure enough, I heard Larry's panicked voice on the other end. "Yes, I called because I was informed you hadn't shown up for work. You should contact your workplace immediately." "That's not the issue right now," Larry interrupted me, shouting, "I can't withdraw the money." Hearing his voice, I couldn't help but burst out laughing, so he finally noticed. I thought he must not have realized because he stole the bank book in a hurry. "My ID, you bird it, remember?" "What? No. Don't you remember it was in the bag for my pottery class?" I answered, laughing. Larry sounded flustered. "Then this ID, isn't it expired?" "I wouldn't know. After your mother passed away, I repeatedly asked you to take care of the paperwork. I went to the bank for the procedure, but they said it couldn't be done because I wasn't the heir. So the bank book was left untouched with just a few dollars remaining. Don't mess around. You have to properly organize things for someone who's not here anymore, right? You said you'd take care of it eventually, so keep it in mind. Don't blame me." "Then what am I supposed to do with this bank book? What to do or not to do?" Unless I go to do the paperwork, there's nothing that can be done about it. As I spoke, Larry kept complaining, but I didn't feel like replying and fell silent. Impatiently, Larry seemed to have gone back to the bank teller explaining the situation. I accidentally burned the ID. Can't anything be done? Maybe by proxy? Look, I'm on the phone with my wife right now. It seemed he put it on speaker, and I could hear the troubled voice of the teller too. I questioned his words. Larry, what are you talking about? You know you can't do anything like that as a stranger, right? The divorce papers were properly processed just now. Thanks for the preparation. Bye. I said what I wanted to say and hung up the phone. I'm sure the bank teller heard my last words too. By now Larry must be either pale with shock or red with anger. Just imagining it made me laugh. I knew I had to leave the house before he returned. With that thought, I quickly packed my things and left the house. My destination was my family's old home, which was empty after my parents passed away. I had inherited that home as well. My mother's assets from running her company totaled $15 million. However, inheriting a large sum of cash wouldn't be safe if Larry found out, especially since we had no children. So I inherited just enough to live comfortably, about $2 million. The rest was the family home, my mother's beautifully preserved dresses, and my father's antiques. If these heirlooms were appraised, they would be worth a lot. I had my brother Jack's permission for this arrangement. Jack had moved out after getting married, and was worried about the family home becoming vacant. He had children, and had taken over the company, so he was happy to inherit just the cash. We completed the inheritance discussions peacefully. After arriving at the family home, I informed Jack that I had divorced Larry and would be living there. He said, "If you are going to live in the family home, it won't be empty," which is a relief. "But are you really okay with divorcing Larry, Sarah?" "Yes," I replied. "We don't have children, and both our parents have passed away. If we both want a divorce, then it's for the best. I want to restart my life and I have no regrets." Jack was worried about me being alone, but living as Larry's servant for life would have been worse. Besides, if I could spend the last moments of my life in this house where I had many memories with my family, even if I was alone, it would be happiness. Larry kept calling me many times after that, but he didn't think I would be at the family home and never came to visit. That day I spent alone in peace. The house was lonely without a family, but I felt relieved from the bottom of my heart. The next day, I finally gathered the energy to go make a deposit. The bank book was with Larry, and it was a bit troublesome to retrieve it. I decided to go around 5 a.m., assuming Larry would be asleep. When I got home and opened the front door, the smell of alcohol hit me. Wow, I couldn't help but grimace at the smell. Entering the living room, I saw beer cans scattered all over. My bank book was torn and left on the table. This is terrible. Tearing up someone's bank book like this, no matter how angry you are, is just wrong. I gathered up the pieces and put them in my bag. I also took a few clothes and went back to my family home. Then I headed to the bank. As I approached the entrance, I heard someone call out, "Sarah." It was Larry. He had been waiting for me. I noticed the bank book was gone, so I figured you'd come here. "Whether I come here or not is none of your business," I said. "Don't say that. We've been together for so long." Even though the divorce was finalized, he still talked like this. I ignored him and entered the bank. Larry kept trying to talk to me, but I firmly ignored him. That's when it happened. "Brother, isn't that Sarah?" someone called out. "Frank, why are you here?" It was Larry's brother, Frank. Both Larry and I were surprised to see him. We hardly ever saw Frank, usually only at funerals. It had been about 43 years since I married Larry, and this was probably the third time I met Frank. He had wanted to cut ties with the family, but his parents, worried about their company's reputation, begged him to at least show up for important family events. Since we had met at my mother-in-law's funeral a few years ago, he probably recognized us. "I'm here for the inheritance of Mom's estate. Thought I'd check the balance and then inform you too," Frank said. Larry's eyes lit up. I was surprised too. I thought there was just a few dollars left in the bank account, but according to Frank, there were also investment trusts set up a long time ago, and safety deposit boxes rented during their father's lifetime. Frank had heard about it from his mother before she passed away. She had sent him a message saying, "If anything happens, you take care of it." However, due to his busy life, it had taken him this long to act. Frank looked apologetically at me and Larry. There was a letter in the safety deposit box along with some jewelry. Mom said all her estate should go to Sarah. What? I was surprised by Frank's words, but Larry looked even more shocked. Frank pulled out a letter from the documents he had with him. I recognized the stationery because I had bought it for my mother-in-law. The letter clearly stated that all the jewelry in the safety deposit box and other assets should go to me, her daughter-in-law Sarah. I could picture my mother-in-law writing it carefully. I remembered asking her if she needed the letter, but she had coldly replied, "It has nothing to do with you." Maybe she meant to write this letter at that time. I covered my mouth in surprise. "Sarah, you've been taking care of everything on your own, right?" Frank said. Despite the mean things my mother-in-law had said, she was sorry and wanted me to handle the estate. She knew that if she told Larry, he'd probably try to keep it quiet. Next to me, Larry's face turned red and he started trembling. Well, I never intended to inherit anything, but as the legal heir, I thought I had to handle it. "It's just a matter of changing the name to Sarah, so that shouldn't be a problem for you. Right, Larry?" Frank said this casually, not knowing about our divorce. Later, I was called to the bank counter. Larry, without any purpose, just sat in the lobby, lacking the energy to follow. That day I completed the reissuance of the bank book and the transfer for the funeral home. "I'll be going ahead, Sarah. I'll contact you again," Frank said, leaving Larry and me behind in the bank. I safely returned home. Frank contacted me again later, explaining that Larry had protested, saying, "Such a letter is invalid." But Frank convinced him, saying, "Respect Mom's wishes." However, unable to satisfy Larry, Frank visited a lawyer for free advice. Although the letter couldn't be recognized as an official will, the lawyer suggested that settling by discussion would be more cost-effective than hiring a lawyer. Larry agreed to the inheritance of the house. The investment trusts weren't worth much, and Larry reluctantly gave up on those and the jewelry. Thus, I formally received my mother-in-law's estate. "If Sarah gets Mom's estate, I should get it from my mother-in-law, right?" Larry argued with the lawyer, but that was a different matter. It was embarrassing, even the lawyer scolded him. Larry couldn't accept it and finally tracked me down at the family home, showing up at my doorstep. "I was wrong. Let's start over," he begged, realizing he couldn't get anything. He knelt at the doorstep, pleading for reconciliation. Start over. There was never any love between us to begin with. What's there to start over? For the first time I felt free to speak my mind. I shared my long-held feelings with Larry. He fell silent, seemingly regretting his actions for the first time, and I couldn't help but smile. "At least you still have the house, right? Have you contacted your workplace? If you're so desperate for money, you better work hard and not lose your job." After saying that, I closed the door. It was finally over. The bank book held assets left by our mothers, and with this I could surely live comfortably from now on. Larry, however, continued to be absent from work without informing his workplace, which led to his dismissal. I had warned him. Without even his passion for work, what was left for him? Maybe his hard work wasn't out of responsibility, but to maintain his dignity. Now, without anyone to show his dignity to and missing the easy money he thought he'd get, it wouldn't be surprising if he felt he had lost his purpose in life. Even though I was concerned for someone I had spent years with, that was it. I had no intention of helping him. "I truly apologize for the trouble caused to you, Sarah." "It's really regrettable," Frank said. He was the only one who apologized and told me I no longer needed to deal with Larry. Realizing the family's issues early on, Frank had left home young and was probably living happily now without involving himself in that home. Larry had become a recluse, but at his age he could probably live on his pension. Wanting to start over showed he had some courage at least, but he should try starting over on his own. I began attending pottery classes again, and my friends were delighted with my return. I hadn't realized how enjoyable it could be to spend time just for myself. At the pottery class I even met someone wonderful. Though I had sworn off marriage, being with someone who loves me might also be a form of happiness. Rather than being alone forever, it might be better to embrace new beginnings. It might feel too late, but just like with the divorce, it's never too late as long as you're alive. Anyone can find happiness no matter their age. I believe that.